Hey guys, welcome back to Trek on the Tube. We are tackling yet another Star Trek review. We're going to be talking about the final installment in the second batch of short treks. The episode is said to be a prequel to the upcoming Star Trek Picard, and I suppose that's correct, though if you want to get annoyingly technical, traditionally, a prequel is a story that contains events that take place before the original work, and in this case, there is not yet an original work. Star Trek Picard hasn't been released yet, so I mean, by definition, it cannot have a prequel or a sequel. I think using the word tie-in, prelude, or prologue, as others have said, would be more appropriate. Though if I'm honest, in this world of cinematic universes, it probably doesn't matter one bit. Don't judge me. Sometimes I overthink things. I know. Moving on. Before we do though, and I know I don't say this often, but all of my reviews are spoiler heavy, not that this actually matters for the short treks themselves, but in this case specifically, we will be talking about things that directly link up to Star Trek Picard, so if you were planning on keeping all of that show a complete surprise, this video might mess that up. You have been warned. Alright, Star Trek Short Treks, Episode 10, Children of Mars. What did I think? Well, it wasn't for me. Originally, I was actually pretty frustrated, almost mad at what I had just seen. If you go check out my discussion over on Starfleetboy, you'll see what I mean. But since then I've calmed down, I've had time to think, reflect, and though it does remain the short treks I enjoy the least of this second bundle, it's no longer something that I detest, but rather just something that I don't care for. What you've got to understand is that this 7 to 8 minute short story is the first piece of entertainment to directly tie into Jean-Luc Picard since Nemesis was released in 2002. So a lot of us have been waiting for the better part of 2 decades to see what happens in the future of Star Trek, and this is what we get. That is where my disappointment comes from, but putting that aside and taking the episode for what it is, a short treks, what can I say? Well, story-wise, it had potential. And it explains a bit of what's going on in the upcoming Star Trek Picard. But other than that, it pretty much falls flat. Let me explain. 2 schoolgirls, enemies. Both live on Earth, go to school on Earth, and don't see their respective parents very often because those parents work over on Mars at the very famous Utopia Planitia shipyards. Mars is attacked, both parents are presumably dead or at the very least in mortal danger. The 2 girls forget their squabbles and find themselves emotionally linked by this devastating event. Yes, it is a bit of a classic trope, but as a character piece, it could have worked very well. If we had spent more time on both students interacting with each other or their parents with dialogue, maybe the story being told would have had some more depth. And I'm not saying make the episode longer. I understand and actually quite enjoy the short format. I'm saying remove the whiny, cringy, overlapping emo pop rock track and have the characters talk instead. As it stands, apart from the reveal of that one piece of information relevant to the upcoming Star Trek Picard, the attack on Mars and the Utopia Planitia shipyards, there's nothing in this short treks that can hold my attention. Most of the entertainment it provides actually comes from my own speculation about Picard and his involvement. Did he go and help the people of Mars? Is that the rescue armada that they've, mentioned so many times? When did he make Admiral? Because he's Admiral here already? Well, you get the picture. Other than that, most of what else I have to say falls under the Easter eggs and references category, I guess. Actually, you know what? I do have some random thoughts I want to talk about. For starters, I didn't like the fight. It was well directed, and it felt very real, so props on that. On a technical level, it works. But even if it's kids, and even if they have bottled up feelings, such raw violence seems out of place on the 24th century Earth we've seen so many times in The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. And then the technology. I don't really like that either. Putting aside the very strange juxtaposition of today's, padlocks and the full-blown sci-fi holographic glass type screens, I don't like this thing, for example. It looks like a Star Trek Enterprise era communicator, but made to fit the modern standards of science fiction in television and film, and it's a bit unsettling. I'm not saying it can't exist, or it makes no sense. There are actually more arguments for it to exist than against. This is a civilian school, so there might not have access to Starfleet technology. One can imagine any number of different communication equipment designs could exist so far in the future as well, so that's all fine, but it just doesn't feel like Star Trek. It feels like generic science fiction, and that is a problem. Star Trek has a very specific aesthetic. It has a uniqueness. It's immediately recognizable. Star Trek has a personality, if you will, and that is lacking in this short. The same argument can be made for this sort of, Skype call that they have in the beginning of the short. The characters aren't using the typical, Berman-era alcars, but I mean, it is a civilian service, so why not? It just doesn't feel very Star Trek. And then, of course, there's the ships. People mention how the ships don't fit the era correctly in the space dock. No, they don't. One could do some mental gymnastics and say that instead of building these ships, they're actually dismantling them. But then they have the Discovery era worker bees working on them. These are details that actually are important. I know that many people kind of dismiss them and think they're not important. I know that the production team behind these shorts don't seem to even notice that they are important, but they are. These details all make up the world of Star Trek, and getting these details right help us believe this world. It helps make the world more believable, more credible. And then, of course, from a more, storytelling perspective, I found it completely stupid that the girl who gets pushed and misses her transport actually misses her transport. Like, no other student told the pilot to wait. Well, what about this person? This person seems to be some sort of security guard. And what, he doesn't tell the pilot to wait either, or even intervene? This person is completely useless. It's a bit strange. Overall, I don't know. Overall, it doesn't work for me. Maybe it works for you. If it does, that's fine. Let me know in the comments. Let's now move on to all of the Easter eggs and references I could find. Utopia Planitia Fleet Yards. I talked about this earlier. It's one of the most important Starfleet facilities. It's also one of the most mentioned shipyards in all of Star Trek, if not the most mentioned, being referenced and shown on screen in The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. The shipyards has some recognizable features, including this dry dock, something now quite common in the franchise. Traditionally, we've seen Utopia Planitia have multiple dry docks. This time it only has one. I don't know, maybe they could be just off screen or out of the shot. Finally, the shipyards is on Mars, which we have also seen in many different iterations of Star Trek. Most of this short treks takes place in a human school. This is the first time we see a civilian Earth school on screen, even if we have seen Vulcan schools and others, for example. Inside the school we can see a library with books. Some people were mad at this, frustrated by it, or didn't really understand why there were books. Look, I'm fine with it. There's a library in Enterprise, and also many characters have been seen with books over the years in Star Trek, so it isn't exactly new. There's also this school shuttle that some didn't like. It's very clearly a shuttle taken from Star Trek Discovery that's been painted yellow. You know what? I think it makes sense. Civilian schools using old repurposed shuttles to transport the kids from here and there seems like a logical thing to do. The shuttles are also seen flying around the Utopia Planitia shipyards, and that is more of a problem because it is, Starfleet, and they shouldn't have such old shuttles. The school has a few big screens up. The first thing we see on them are the words First Contact Day, which we already know to be April 5th, celebrating first contact between humans and Vulcans. Captain Janeway once said that she had the day off school on First Contact Day, but not all schools might, adhere to the same rules and regulations. The other thing we see on these screens is the new United Federation of Planets logo. Later on, a news report is featured on those very screens. The news report is from the FNN, the Federation News Network, something first mentioned in Generations. One of the girls has a poster with the word Bajoran on it. Looks like some sort of explanation of the Bajoran brain. Who knows? The Bajorans are a race first introduced in The Next Generation that play a huge part in Deep Space Nine, and they are also seen in Voyager. To end all this, the title card pops up at the end, which is a first for the short treks, and it's been written in the same font as The Next Generation. Also something that many people noticed, this short treks is not based upon Star Trek, but rather based upon Star Trek The Next Generation. Alright, that's it. Those were the Easter eggs and references, and that was my review. I know my review was pretty short, but I don't really know what to say. I just wasn't wowed by this thing. I'm still pumped for Star Trek Picard. The more people see it, the more excited I am. That's it. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, share with your friends. Support on Patreon if you want. Don't forget that I will be doing those reaction videos, those very short reaction videos on Twitter for Star Trek Picard as it's released. And I will continue to make these longer, full review and Easter egg videos on YouTube. Don't worry about it. There you go. Live long and prosper. You're the best.